So, when looking at a poem, I always start with the title. And this is a really interesting one, The Charge of the Light Brigade. And that definite article, the and the Light Brigade, the Charge and the Light Brigade, would suggest that this is a poem just about one event, a key event, something huge. And it's also not about individuals, it's about like the Light Brigade as a mass, as an entity. Just a really interesting thing, and it's written, I'll take you back a little bit. So Tennyson, the man who wrote the poem, read a newspaper article about a disastrous cavalry charge against Russian forces at the Battle of Balaclava, and that was on the 25th of October 1854. And Tennyson was poet laureate at the time, so he took what he read in this newspaper report and decided he was going to write a poem about it. Now, being poet laureate meant that he couldn't really criticise anything about the charge. Instead, he's really written something in praise of the soldiers who lost their lives and risked their lives. So it starts with this repetition of half a league, half a league, half a league onward, all in the valley of death rode the 600. So it's not until here that we find out that this was 600 men, all going to war and all fighting. The repetition at the beginning of half a league, half a league, half a league onward gives you that impression of this unremitting speed of the charge of the Light Brigade. There was no pauses, there was nothing. It's just, it picks up the pace and momentum of the poem. Then you've got forward the Light Brigade, charge for the guns, he said. We don't ever find out who he is. And it's almost as if he doesn't matter who he is, the man who gave this order. The men just rode on into the valley of death. And you've got this biblical allusion here about the valley of death. Yea, though I walk through the valley of death, I shall fear no evil. So it makes the soldiers sound like they're brave, fearless, and indeed they are, just charging for the guns. The guns? Very specific about that. So that, and it ends with rode the 600. So it ends up focused, the stanza ends up focused completely on the 600 soldiers, cavalrymen who were riding into battle. And then we'll repeat forward the Light Brigade. So the instruction to go is repeated again. So we've got more repetition. So the structure of this poem is really, really interesting. There is an awful lot of repetition in it. Then, was there a man dismayed? So we've gone from this collective of the Light Brigade down to an individual man. So you've got this idea of the individual and the collective going on there. And asking if an individual was dismayed, and it said, no, not one individual, not one of them was dismayed by what they were about to do. Although they knew that someone had blundered, and that's again impersonal. It's like the he in stanza 1. It doesn't matter who that is. It's just someone, some vague person. This poem is not about the person who made the mistake, and that's what blundered means. It means to make a huge mistake. And it suggests carelessness as well. It doesn't matter, we're not interested, we're not focused on this. We're actually focused on the soldiers, and they're back to being a collective here, with there's not to, there's not to, there's not to. There's not to make reply, there's not to reason why. There's but to do and die. And we've got this anaphora, which is the repetition of a phrase at the beginning of a line of poetry, or a speech. And this anaphora really focuses back in, from the someone, back into the soldiers. And the fact that they didn't do anything other than ride into the valley of death. And we've got that repetition again, rode the 600. And the repetition of into the valley of death. So those last two lines are repeated again. So we're constantly being brought back to the action of the soldiers, what the soldiers did. They rode into the valley of death, all 600 of them together as a collective. And we've got more anaphora here. We've got cannon to right of them, cannon to left of them, cannon in front of them. So you've got this cannon 2, cannon 2. This idea that they were surrounded by cannons. That's what that anaphora suggests, that repetition suggests, is that there are cannons everywhere but behind them. And then we've got these very interesting verbs, volleyed, thundered, stormed. And they're dynamic verbs, but they also have an almost onomatopoeic presence. you can sound, from those three verbs, you can hear and feel the chaos that was the battle that they were charging into. It also makes them seem small. Thunder and storm are great, big, huge events, and the men in comparison seem very small riding into this. And it says, stormed out with shot and shell. It's got that repetition of the sh sound. Almost like you can hear the shots whistling past them. So you have the thunder of the huge cannons going off, and then you've got the sh of the shots going off. So at this moment, we're completely immersed in the battle. Then you go back to the soldiers. Boldly they rode and well, into the jaws of death, into the mouth of hell. And the personification here makes the enemy huge. We've got death as the enemy, the mouth of hell. So we've got about these men being consumed, the jaws and the mouth, consuming these men, eating them up as they charge in towards them. These men really do have a huge enemy to fight against. You really can't avoid death or hell. And these men, these noble men, brave men, just kept charging. And here we have this finisher, rode the 600. So that's repeated at the end of each of the three stanzas. However, there's a real turning point here in this fourth stanza. First of all, you go from this, the hugeness of volleyed and thundered and stormed, and the shot and shell and the cannons, to flushed, and it's their sabres bare. So they've all got their swords out, and they're all flashing wildly. They're all striking wildly as they charge at the cannons. And the sort of the discrepancy between taking a sabre to a cannon fight is not lost here. However, these men are totally brave and fearless, and they are there sabring. There's a nice verb for you. Sabring the gunners there. So you've got this contrast between the sabres and the guns. And yet, these brave 600 men on the horses are there against the cannons with sabres and triumphing. You've got this sort of move from the massive to the small here, and then we're back out charging an army. So their enemy is a huge army, all cannons back at them. And they're charging an army while all the world wondered. And I'm not sure who all the world is at this moment. I suspect it's the soldiers who are standing behind the cannons thinking, what on earth are they doing? It's also the people who'd given the order, the final order, must have been thinking, I don't know why we're doing this. We're sending these men to sure death. So they're all out there wondering. However, the Light Brigade are not wondering. Was there a man? There's not a reason why. They don't wonder about it. They just get on and do. They're active. They plunged in the battery smoke, right through the line they broke. Cossack and Russian reeled from the sabre stroke, shattered and sundered. So this is the first mention of the enemy. Up until now, the enemy has been ignored. A bit like the he who gave the order. Then the enemy is not that important. What we're focused on for this entire poem is the bravery of the 600 men who rode into battle knowing that almost certain death would ensue. They didn't flinch, they just went. And we've got the Cossack and Russian, the enemy, reeled from the sabre stroke. So this is the complete opposite of the charge of the Light Brigade who were charging. They didn't reel, they didn't hesitate even. They just went for it. And that's what all this repetition is about. Their lack of hesitation, they're just going for it. And they reeled, and they were shattered and sundered. The enemy was shattered and sundered by the brave 600. However, we've got an absolute change here, because up until now we've had that final line, rode the 600. And it says, then they rode back, but not the 600. And that repetition of not, and the enjambment that goes with it, forces us, it really does emphasise that it was not all 600 of them. Not the 600 of them. They didn't come back unified. They returned lesser than they went. And then we'll get back to repetition here. So we've got cannon to right of them, cannon to the left of them, which repeats what we had in stanza 3. However, there's a shift here, cannon behind them. So this is them retreating. They've done their best. They've shattered and sundered the enemy, the Cossacks and the Russians. There's nothing more they can do, so they're right back. However, we're still, repetition, volleyed and thundered, stormed up with shot and shell. So there's still this huge noise and the heat of the battle going on. This is very horrific, isn't it? And they're retreating. And we get back to, we're now going to zone in on individuals, because it says while horse and hero fell. So we're back to individuals. We're no longer thinking about the 600 as brave and fearless all together. This is people who are being left behind, the horse and hero falling. They that had fought so well came through the jaws of death, back from the mouth of hell, all that was left of them. So we're repeating again. All that was left of them, left of 600. So we've got not the 600, followed by left of the 600. And the final line calls them the noble 600. So the first 3 stanzas are talking about the action of the 600. And then we change. We talk about the impact of the battle on the 600. Okay? For the 4th and 5th stanzas. We've got this repetition. They came through the jaws of death, back from the mouth of hell. So we're repeating it. And Tennyson really does mimic that charge and then the return from the charge. Okay? The final stanza is a much, much shorter stanza. And if you look at it, actually, if you look at the poem, the first 3 stanzas are very equal and even, and then you've got 2 longer stanzas and then this really short one. So we've got the first 3 stanzas, it's that pace of them charging and what they're doing, and they're going for it. Then we've got stanza 4, which is actually talking about the battle, and then stanza 5, which is coming back from the battle and the impact of it. Stanza 6, however, is another turning point. It starts with a rhetorical question, when can their glory fade? So Tennyson is actually asking the reader to reflect on the glory of this battle and how, when, if ever, we can forget them. And he continues with, oh, the wild charge they made. All the world wondered. Honour the charge they made, honour the Light Brigade, noble 600. So he starts with this rhetorical question and then he moves on to imperatives. He's telling you what you must do. And he's telling you what this poem does. It makes you wonder, all the world is going to wonder why those men were so brave, how they could be so brave and fearless, and what would you do if you were in their position. He's described the wild charge, and it's wild in the sense that it's a last ditch. We're just going to obey we're going to obey directions, and we're going to look fierce and fearless as we do it. That's what makes it a wild charge. But then you've got all the world wondering, and here we are as readers wondering what on earth was going on there, who made the mistake. But Tennyson's not saying, question this, question who made the mistake. He's saying, honour the Light Brigade, honour. So he's saying this entire poem is about honouring what they did and what they sacrificed. It immortalises the Light Brigade of the title. It doesn't tell you anything about specific soldiers. It doesn't criticise anybody. It just says, look at what these fantastic men did. They were amazing. And it's a real, I think the structure of it is interesting in that it mimics that charging forwards and coming back, and then the repetition, which makes the pace of this poem really, really speedy and intensifies how badly this battle went for the Light Brigade.